Hi, David Vizard here, and you, my friends, are watching PowerTec 10. In case you need reminding, this is the channel that seriously attempts giving you the information you're looking for to make your vehicle faster without any BS and with technical accuracy. Now, I want to emphasize that technical accuracy. Let's take a look at the subject that we're dealing with in this episode 98. If you've seen episode or edition 1 and 2 of my Ford Mustang EcoBoost project, you'll know that we've dealt with the basic test of the vehicle and then we took a look at gearing. Well, let's continue on from this. Because it has consequences, the high gearing that is used with this vehicle. Let me start by saying we are going to address wheels and tires first. Why? Because it is, or it can be, a cost-effective way of making the car look faster, lowering it, reducing the gearing, increasing the power of the brakes, and getting it to handle and go around corners better. 5 points in its favor. Now, how are we going to do this? The simple answer to that question is with great difficulty. I'm not exaggerating there. It will be easier for you to sort out a cam for the most difficult engine possible than it is to just dive in and get a proper set of wheels without fumbling in some area. Now, I could give you a list of these, but to do this video, I've had to research tons of websites, mostly to try and find wheels for myself. And in so doing, I found some really good videos that do a far better job of explaining something than I do. So I'm going to show excerpts from these and reference them. Now, one of the ones I want to bring onto the stage right here is the one from Alex at Fitment Industries. They do wheels and they can be a very good source of your wheels and tires. Why? Because they hold so many brands, but that's not the only place. But anyway, on with Alex. This guy, in my book, really gets the job done.
I remember being 16 and you want to go and you want to pick up some wheels, so you go onto the internet, you do all your research, you try to figure out what fits, you see somebody that you have no idea who it is, put down their specs, and they kind of sort of guess what offset is, even though offset and backspacing aren't the same thing. And so you go out there and you find the wheels in that exact spec, so then you get them ordered, but then you realize that you didn't get tires for them, so then you start to put the tires from your OEM wheels onto your aftermarket wheels, so then you get them mounted, then you got to get them balanced, then you figure out, oh gosh, I forgot to get conical seats because these new wheels don't fit my actual, OEM wheels are not the same thing, so then you got to go get different wheel lugs or different wheel bolts, and then you're figuring it out at Advanced Auto Parts, and you can't just decide what's going on. So then you go back to the shop to get everything installed, and you forgot that you had to get TPMS because, well, you have cars newer than 2008, so then you forget to get TPMS, so then you have to get TPMS installed before you get the tires put on, so then you get the tires put on, and then you go to put them on your car, and then you go over to actually look at your car, and you're super excited because you spent all this time, you spent weeks and weeks and weeks getting this all stuff figured out, and they don't fit because they hit the strut. That's what happens when you guess, and that happens to a lot of people, and we see it in a lot of...
Well done, Alex. That's got to be the ultimate piece of information packaging. Now, let's get on with our problem. Let's start with the basics here and move into the technical aspects to solve at least some of those problems that Alex has just gone through. There are other things that only a minority of websites deal with, and they deal with it generically. I'm going to deal with this more in terms of our being able to do the fitment on the Mustang and other American cars such as that. Well, of course, some of it will apply to imports as well, but you'll be able to sort it out. So here we go. I'm going to start by moderating the extent and the cost of the updates. You would think that selecting some wheels would be a pretty easy thing. Not like speccing out a camshaft for an engine you've never seen before and having to get it right first time. No, it's way harder than that. I cannot believe the dead ends that I came to with my Google searches. Unbelievable. And then there's a whole bunch of wheel suppliers out there that simply don't return the calls. I've called some wheel suppliers and you get that message and I say, "Hi, this is David Bizard, I'm the tech. I want to buy some wheels, can you call me back please?" And a voice message says, "We will call you back within 24 hours. Or at least sometimes it does. Well, guess what? It's 3 weeks since I called some of them. I am not going to waste my time with companies like that, and nor should you. So what we're going to do here, or what I'm going to do, is to find those companies that have some merit in some direction. Now, obviously, we cannot cover the entire spectrum out there. It is just too vast, but I am going to try and cover it as best I can so that you get the best deal. Now, let us look at what we can do with wheels and tires. First, we've got to avoid a few pitfalls. Now, it might be a good idea if you get a hold of some wheel and tire terms. And for this, I suggest the very first site you go to is tiresize.com. That website has tools that will allow you to put in your existing wheel and tire and the new one you want, and it builds up one beside the other so you can see the difference in width and the difference in diameter, as well as have it all listed numerically. Very good site. Here's the website you need to start with, tiresize.com. And going across here, you can see all the different things that it will calculate. Good starting point. Dropping down this page, we get to the actual diagrams of what we're trying to achieve here. You'll see number 1, tire is our original. Number 2 is the new one we've put in. Now, moving across to the left of this is where we enter the data. Pictorially, we've seen what it looks like. Now let's look at raw numbers. In the row labeled diameter, you can see we've dropped from our original tire size of 27.3 down to 26 inches. That minus 4.8 there means that we've reduced our gear ratio by 4.8%, and at the same time we have lowered the car by almost 3/4 of an inch. Tire width has gone up from 9.3 to 10 inches. Side wall has dropped from 4.6 inches to 4. The circumference from 85.6 to 81.7, that's the same, minus 4.8. And our revs per mile has gone from 740 to 775, an increase of 35. So far, we've assumed the stock factory wheels. That is the 8-inch wide ones. Now let's take a look and see what the differences would be if we put on, say, a 9.5-inch wide wheel, which we know will fit because that's what's on the GTs and GT premiums and so on and so forth. So let's enter the relevant numbers. By increasing the width of the tire to 275 and dropping its aspect ratio from the previous size we had in this column of 40 down to 35, the wheel diameter drops to 25.6, which is giving us almost a 7/8 of an inch of lowering, and the gear ratio is dropped to minus 6.2% of its original. That means it's lower by 6.2%. We'll look at the equivalent axle ratio for that in a while. Everything else has also changed corresponding to the difference in the wheel diameter. As you can see, changing our tire here in both instances has served to lower the car, lower the final drive ratio, increase the grip, widen the stance, and also hopefully look tougher on the drag strip, or anywhere else for that matter. As expected, changing the tire diameter changes the effective gear ratio. In other words, a tire diameter change has an equivalence to a gear ratio change. Tiresize.com has that covered. Just select the gear ratio calculator shown here and enter the diameters involved, click the blue button, and presto. You can see here that our 275 by 35 tire has dropped the gear ratio from the original 3.15 to an effective 3.36. Now down the road, the plan is to put a 3.73 final drive in, which with the smaller tire size we're using will give us a 3.97 to 1. That should give us some good acceleration and run the car in the speed range which it is capable of in terms of the horsepower it's developing. Now there is one more aspect of wheel and tire geometry in relation to the suspension that I want to talk about here. It's something that is rarely mentioned, and I think that probably 99% of car enthusiasts, hot rodders, etc., who change wheels and tires probably never give any consideration to because they're not informed of it. Now I don't know if it's called a different thing in England compared to here, but in England it was most often referred to as the relationship of the kingpin axis point on the road compared with the wheel center line, or the scrub radius. Now let's just go into that and I'll explain what it's all about and why it can be important, especially if you're road racing. What you are about to see here is a drawing out of Suspension Secrets webpage. Now, this is another one of those sites available on the internet. They have some exceedingly good stuff for the guy who is a beginner to an advanced beginner on there, and it will save you a lot of time and effort setting up your suspension to reference it. What's demonstrated in this drawing here is the kingpin inclination axis and the center line of the tire. These two hit the ground in a different place. The difference between the two of them is the scrub radius. In this next drawing, again from Suspension Secrets, you will see how it is possible to have these two lines intersect either side of the center line of the wheel depending on how it's all set up. Indicated here are the wheel center lines. Following that, we have the inclination steering axis. That's usually the kingpin inclination angle. Lastly, the red arrows are indicating the point at which the steering or kingpin inclination angle intersects the road relative to the wheel and tire center line. To see where we're all going with this, note the position of the tire center line in relation to the point that the kingpin angle axis intersects with the ground. On the drawing on the left, the tire hangs outside of that kingpin inclination reference point. On the drawing on the right, the tire hangs on the inside of it. Now here's where we need to focus on what's going on, so pay attention. Let's consider the drawing on the left. You'll see that the chassis in relation to the wheel is off to the left. The kingpin inclination point of contact on the ground is on the inside of the tire. Alternately, we can look at it as the tire center line being outside of the point that the kingpin axis intersects with the ground. To demonstrate the point here, let us imagine that with just the wheels on this side of the car, we hit a fairly deep puddle of water. With no other factors taken into account, this will tend to pull the vehicle in the direction of the arrows. However, when we take the position of the tire center line in relation to the kingpin axis, things take a turn for the worse. The tire gets pushed back as you view this drawing here. In so doing, it rotates about the kingpin axis and turns the vehicle into the puddle of water. This, put simply, exaggerates the effect of hitting the water. So, it has a destabilizing action on the vehicle. Now let's move across to the situation on the right-hand side. Here we have the center line of the wheel and tire inside the pivot axis of the kingpin. The situation when this hits our hypothetical puddle of water is that it pushes the tire in at the center line so that it pivots around the kingpin axis point. This turns it away from the puddle of water that we're imagining this hits, therefore creating a more stable situation when one wheel hits a different grip, drag, resistance situation to the other one. Okay, all this theory is all very well, but the matter is, how much does it affect things in practice? Difficult question to answer. That is almost like asking how long a piece of string is. So let me give you some of my experiences. Starting off with a relatively skinny tire, I say relatively skinny, something that's typically ordinary. If you have the wheel spaced outside of the kingpin axis, so that's like our criteria where it turns into whatever the dragging or bump is, which is not good, then you need to keep the wheel close to the center of that point where the axis hits the ground. Now you don't want it right on it because it makes the steering kind of numb. An inch off is not a problem. Now, when the wheel gets wider or you space your wheels out, that becomes more of an issue. So, it's not a good way to go. However, power steering can, to some extent, save the day. When a wheel hits a bump on a power steering car, the impact of that bump or the drag from whatever it is that you hit does not get through the steering system to the same extent. And also you have more capability of correcting it quickly without it snatching the wheel out of your hands. So let's now go back to the other situation. If we have the center of the steering wheel on the inside of the kingpin inclination axis contact point, we find that under adverse conditions the car is safer. For instance, Saab many years ago had a suspension system that they were showing off with a world champion rally driver, and I can't remember his name, and I should do. I was a big fan of his, but hey, that's it. Age and everything else gets to you finally. But anyway, what happened was he drove at 60 miles an hour over a rack of nails or spikes and blew out the one tire, it would have been the right one. And the car continued to go in virtually a straight line, because that blowout, which should have caused the car to turn, I'll face the camera for you. The blowout, which would have normally caused the car to turn this way, caused the input to the wheel, the road wheel that is, to turn the wheels that way, which counteracted it. So, and I think he actually demonstrated this, hitting this with his hands off the steering wheel. So that's how great it can be. Now that's with a skinny tire and no power steering. Now let's get back to our Mustang here and see how that goes with that. The lesson to be learned here is that we need to have, if we're going to put on bigger wheels and tires, or wider ones, we need to, as far as possible, keep the scrub radius the same, which means that if we are going to widen wheels, we widen them equally inside and outside. And if we end up too close to the strut, we have to remember that we always go and use up that space before we start using up extra space outwards. That gives us the best handling. So use that tiresize.com formulas to locate your offset and everything like this, so that you get the tire to be about 3/8 of an inch from the strut. Then start moving out. Now, having an inch more of scrub radius on the outside is not going to be the end of the world, and that's as far as you should go. But putting these tires on which are all the way out is not good for handling. All it does is show real racers that you don't know what you're doing, or you're a poser. There's nothing wrong with being a poser, I suppose, but this is a performance channel. The good looks are third on the list, not first. Now, how do we decide how much we can go in? Well, I think I showed you with a lump of clay earlier on. You push a lump of clay down between the existing tire you've got and the strut now, and however thick it is, you can use about 3/4 of that. Well, we're an inch thick, right? And so I'm reckoning we can use 3/4 of that. However, our 9.5 wheels will keep the scrub radius the same, because the spacing on them and the offset is such that the center line of the center line of the kingpin axis and the center line of the wheel are still spaced the same. So there, my friends, we have what to do and not to do as far as moving those wheels around. Now, there's other factors to consider here. But before we do that, let's go and validate where we were at the drag strip with the Mustang to see what it produced in terms of times at the strip.
Hello, I'm Doug Banks, friend and neighbor of David Visors, and can't get a better friend than David.
And I didn't pay him to say that. That's free.
But I helped David here and there on his race cars and stuff, and we went to Shadyside.
Yep, Shadyside Dragway.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, Doug made the first pass in the Mustang. Well, I got stuff ready and that, and got ready to film stuff, and it was a miserable evening. The sun was incredibly bright, and it was hot, wasn't it, Doug?
It was hot.
Yeah, even when I checked the temperature last thing at night before we left, and that was what, just gone 9 o'clock?
About 9 o'clock.
Yep. It was still 88 degrees. So
humidity right up there with it.
Yeah, worse conditions for a drag car, because they are real sensitive to temperature. Not so much altitude, because it's an artificial atmosphere that the engine breathes, i.e. it comes from the turbo. As you go up, the performance doesn't drop off in altitude as quick. as it does with a normally aspirated car, and that's because the tailpipe pressure drops, so the pressure across the turbo can get the exhaust out faster. So that means the intake turbo speeds up, and that makes up for, not totally, but for much of the altitude change. Now, it can't keep on doing that forever, but over the range of air pressures that we encounter, it means that we don't correct for altitude. It gives a bigger correction than is right. However, we do correct for temperature. Now, Doug went up and we did a pretty good time. We had no idea how to do a burnout, right? Neither of us did we. We just winged it. we winged it, and I think Doug did a 9, very low 9s. And that doesn't sound very fast, but the point is that everyone was going much slower. And the proof of the matter is on the first run I did, right, I ran up against that Roush Mustang, didn't I?
Yeah, he only beat you by half car length.
Yep. I was amazed. My car pulled alongside of his all the way until about maybe 100 feet from the end, and that Roush Mustang just pulled ahead. So I'm thinking, had I got a good start, and had it been a bit cooler, I might have been right there with him through the lights. Would I have beaten him? Only if he really screwed up somewhere. But that shows how fast these 2.3 Mustangs can go. And we haven't even started yet. So, what we did find out, Doug, was that we couldn't get that son of a bitch off the line very quick, could we?
No.
In fact, you got the quickest off the line start, didn't you?
I did.
Which was the fastest start we had. Got the 2.104.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, and the fastest I've got is 2.14. So Doug's what, 36 thousandths of a second quicker. But that's a terrible time. We should be able to get a car like this off the line in about 1.9, given the right gearing, right tires, etc. And that's what we're looking at now, is the tires. Doug, you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that that my first pass in that car,
Yeah.
that I was really surprised with. It set me back in the seat, and that's the first time I'd driven that car fast.
Yeah,
So
you've driven lots of Roush Mustangs.
I have, and it accelerated really surprisingly.
Yeah.
It really surprised me.
It's an entry-level Mustang.
Entry-level Mustang.
Yeah, can't ask much more from.
No.
That's the cheapest you can get. The only way you can get it cheaper is to get the manual transmission, and that's $1,700 less.
Less.
Right? Whether it's any faster or not, I don't know, because the 10-speed is a very impressive transmission. Anyway, Doug, that's about all we got to tell them about the drag strip stuff.
Yeah, until next time we go.
Yeah, well, it's going to be 3 weeks' time. I hope I've got the tires on it and a few other things to see where we're going to go.
That'd be good.
Anyway,
looking forward to it.
Yep. What was I going to say there? Yeah, back onto the tech stuff for the wheels and tires. This series, by the way, on wheels and tires can probably run 2 editions of this Mustang stuff. So we haven't finished yet. Here's my run against the Roush Mustang. Couple of points to note. First, look and see what happens at the start. You'll see that Roush Mustang moves much sooner than you see my car move. It's about 10 frames difference. Now, that guy did a good start. I think his time was 0.09, mine was 0.241. You'll see he made a good move there early on. I think he staged very shallow, but so did I. And when I left the line, it didn't come up onto the boost as fast as I would like it to have done. So I didn't really make any, how should I say, useful gains for the extra grip that the drag strip presented. But anyway, you'll notice that he's gone about 6 or 7 feet before I move. And you can also hear the tires, my tires chirp as it goes into second gear. And I want you to note the difference in the time of the lights going on at the end. You'll see that at a guess it's about 1/10 of a second, and that would correspond to about 6 feet that he beat me by. Now I think that's a pretty good result. Corrected, that run would have been just shy of 80 miles an hour and just shy of breaking into the 8s, right? But the fastest time was done by Doug, and he managed to do a 9.104, which corrected to an 8.92, and the speed was 79 point something, and that corrected to 80.32. So we broke into the 80s and we broke into the 8s, but very marginally. Now we got to see how we will do next when we fixed some of the problems with the launch. That launch was terrible. It was a about a 2.2 60 foot. The other guy had 1.8 60 foot. That's where we need to be. That's proof that you can do a 60 foot in that time on good street tires with a Mustang. Okay, enough for this edition. Now let me just make sure I've made a point here. Right, early on I said I had an announcement about Apex wheels. I do. Right, I'm going to make this announcement in this issue because I've got the solution to their problems in the beginning of the next issue. Here's the deal. They caused me to miss my copy date. The fastest response I got from them was 5 days. They were typically 6 to 7. I wanted a phone call to ask them some questions. Never got it. The only thing that they have, which I was pleased about, was if you go onto their fitment deal, they will tell you what wheel widths of theirs can be fitted with either no changes to the car, minor changes to the car, or fairly big changes to the car. So their website's worth doing. Their wheels are really good if you can get them. But we'll talk about that in the next issue. Meanwhile, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Thank you.